Yesterday afternoon we had just started on the participation of the SA in the first point, the dissemination of ideology or propaganda. In an article which appeared in the SA Man at page 1 of the issue of January 1934, which is document 3050 PS, and I refer to page 25 of the English translation. Page 25 of the English translation, and I should like document number 3050. Page 25, if Your Honor, please. It's the portion shown in red brackets. I quote, it's dated the 6th of January 1934. The new Germany would not have been without the SA Man, and the new Germany would not exist if the SA Man would now, with the feeling of having fulfilled his duty, quietly and unselfishly and modestly step aside, or if the new state would send him home much like the Moors who had done his obligation. On the contrary, the SA Man, following the will of the Führer, stands as a guarantee of the National Socialist Revolution before the gates of power and will remain standing there at all times. For still gigantic missions await fulfillment, which would not be thinkable without the presence and the active cooperation of the SA. What has been accomplished up until now, the taking over of the power in the state and the ejection of those elements which are responsible for the pernicious developments of the post-war years as bearers of Marxism, liberalism, and capitalism, are only the preliminaries, the springboard for the real aims of National Socialism. Being conscious of the fact that the real National Socialist construction work would be building in an empty space without the usurpation of power by Adolf Hitler, the movement and the SA Man, as the aggressive bearer of its will, primarily have directed all of their efforts thereupon to achieve the platform of continued striving and to obtain the fundamental for the realization of our desires in the state by force. Out of this comes the further missions of the SA for the completion of the German Revolution. First, to be the guarantee of the power of the National Socialist state against all attacks from without as well as from within. Second, to be the high institute of education of the people for the living National Socialism. The function of SA as the propagandist of the party was more than a responsibility which SA took unto itself. It was the responsibility recognized by the law of Germany. Document 1395 PS, which is the copy of the law entitled, the law entitled, quote, Law on Securing the Unity of Party and State, unquote, which I have referred to before, and it is promulgated by the Reich Cabinet in 1933, I desire to read Article 3 on page 1 of the English translation, 1395. The members of the National Socialist German Party and the SA, including their subordinate organizations, was the leading and driving force of the National Socialist state, will bear greater responsibility toward the Führer, people, and state. In case they violate these duties, they will be subject to special jurisdiction by party and state. The Führer may extend these regulations in order to include members of other organizations. Thus were the SA members the ideology bearers of the Nazi Party, the soldiers of an idea, to use the expression employed by the Nazi writers. And permit me to emphasize that the SA was the propagandist agency, the principal agency employed by the conspirators to disseminate their fanaticism among the people of Germany. Your Honor, please, I'd ended the quotation. I'm sorry if I didn't refer to it. I need hardly point out the importance of this function to the successful effectuation of the conspiracy, for it is self-evident that the Nazis could not have carried their conspiracy to the stages which they did had not the minds of the people of Germany been cruelly and viciously influenced and infected with their evil ideologies. I now proceed to the other functions of the SA which I mentioned previously. The next is the use of the early stages of the conspiracy as the strong arm of the NSDAP. In the early stages of the Nazi movement, the employment of the SA as the propagandist instrument of the party involved and was combined with the exercise of physical violence and brutality. As said by Hitler in Mein Kampf, and this excerpt appears at page 4 of document 2760. 2760. Page 4 of the English translation. U.S. Exhibit 256. I quote, "The young movement from the first day espoused the standpoint that its idea must be put forward spiritually, but that the defense of this spiritual platform must, if necessary, be secured by strong arm means." I'll read the rest of that paragraph. Faithful to its belief in the enormous significance of the new doctrine, it seems obvious to the movement that for the attainment of its goal, no sacrifice can be too great, unquote. And so in the early days of the Nazi movement, so that the Nazis might better spread their fanatical philosophies, the SA was employed as a terroristic group in order to gain for the Nazis possession and control of the streets. This is another way of saying that it was the function of the SA to beat up and terrorize all political opponents. The importance of this function is indicated in document 2168 PS, USA Exhibit number 411, which was written by SA Sturmfuhrer Bayer upon orders from SA headquarters. And I refer to page 3 of the English translation of document 2168. The third paragraph from the bottom, quoting, "Possession of the streets is the key to power in the state. For this reason, the SA marched and fought. the public would never have received knowledge from the agitative speeches of the Little Reichstag faction and its propaganda, or from the desires and aims of the party, if the martial tread and battle song of the SA companies had not beat the measures for the truth of a relentless criticism of the state of affairs in the governmental system. They wanted the young movement to keep silent. Nothing was to be read in the press about the labor of the National Socialists, not to mention the basic aims of its platform. They simply did not want to awake any interest in it. However, the martial tread of the SA took care that even the drowsiest citizens had to see at least the existence of a fighting troop, unquote. The importance of the work of the SA in the early days of the movement was indicated by Goebbels in a speech which appeared in Das Archiv, October 1935. This is our document 3211 PS, USA Exhibit 419. It's on the first page of the English translation, number 3211. Quoting, "The inner political opponents did not disappear due to mysterious, unknown reasons, but because the movement possessed a strong arm within its organization, and the strongest arm of the movement is the SA. The Jewish question will not be solved separately, but by laws which we enact, for we are the anti-Jewish government," unquote. Specific evidence of the activities of the SA during the early period of the Nazi movement, from 1922 to 1931, is found in a series of articles appearing in the SA Man, entitled SA Battle Experiences Which We'll Never Forget. Each of these articles is an account of a street or a meeting hall battle waged by the SA against a group of political opponents in the early days of the Nazi struggle for power. These articles demonstrate that during this period, it was the function of the SA to employ physical violence in order to destroy and subvert all forms of thought and expression which might be considered hostile to the Nazi aims or philosophy. A number of such articles have been translated, and the titles are sufficiently descriptive to constitute evidence of the activities of the SA in the early stages of the movement. I should like to quote from a few of these titles by giving the page reference to these big newspaper volumes. Here's one of 24 February 1934, page 4. The title, "We Subdue the Red Terror." 8th of September 1934, page 12. The article is entitled, "Nightly Street Battles on the Czech Border," unquote. 6th of October 1934, page 5. "Street Battle in Chemnitz."
In where?
Chemnitz, Chemnitz. Another one of 20 October 1934, page 7. The title is "Victorious SA." And I'll skip several of them. Here's one of 26 January 1935, page 7. The title, "The SA Conquers Rastenburg," Rastenburg. Another of 23rd February 1935, page 5. "Company 88 receives its baptism of fire." One of 20 October 1934, page 7. The article is "SA Against Subhumanity," unquote. Finally, I'll mention the one of 10 August 1935, page 10. The title is The Blood Sunday of Berlin, unquote. And then there's a portrait in the article of 11 September 1937, page 1, which symbolizes the SA man as, quote, the master of the streets, unquote. For an example of the nature of these articles, one appeared in the Franken edition of the SA Man for 30 October 1937, page 3. It is entitled, quote, 9 November 1923 in Nuremberg, and I should like to quote from pages 14 and 15 of document 3050 PS, which is an English translation of this article. Document 3050 PS, pages 14, 15. I can now quote. We stayed overnight in the Colosseum. That means Nuremberg. Then in the morning, we found out what had happened in Munich. Now a revolution will also be made in Nuremberg, we said. All of a sudden, the police came from the Maxter Guard and told us that we should go home, that the putsch in Munich failed. We did not believe, and we did not go home. Then came the state police with fixed bayonets and drove us out of the hall. One of us then shouted, "Let's go to the Café Habsburg." By the time we arrived, however, the police had everything surrounded. Some shouted then, "The Jewish place will be stormed, out with the Jews." Then the police started to beat us up. Then we divided into small groups and roamed through town, and wherever we caught a Red or a Jew we knew, a fist fight ensued. Then in the evening we marched, although the police had forbidden it, to a meeting at Fürth. During the promenade again, the police attempted to stop us. It was all the same to us. Already in the next moment we attacked the police in our anger, so they were forced to flee. We marched on to Geisman Hall. There again they tried to stop us, but the Landsturm, which was also there, attacked the protection forces like persons possessed and drove them from the streets. After the meeting we dissolved and went to the edge of town. From there we marched in close column back to Nuremberg. In the Will Street near the Plärre, the police came again. We simply shoved them aside. They did not trust themselves to attack, for what would a bloodbath have meant? We decided beforehand not to take anything from anyone. Also in Fürth, they had already noticed that we were up to no good. A large mass of people accompanied us on the march. We marched with unrolled flags and sang so that the streets resounded. "Comrade, reach me your land. We want to stand together, even though they have false impressions. The spirit must not die. Swastika on the steel helmet, black, white, red armband. We are known as Stormtroop S.A. Hitler." I now skip to the use of the S.A. to consolidate the power of the party. The third function of the SA was to carry out various programs designed to consolidate Nazi control of the German state, including particularly the dissolution of the trade unions and the Jewish persecutions. The SA groups were employed to destroy political opposition by force and brutality wherever necessary. An example of this is shown in document 3221 PS, U.S. Exhibit 442, and that is an original affidavit made in the state of Pennsylvania in the United States of America by William F. Solomon, which we now quote in its entirety, 3221. William F. Solomon, Randall Hill School, Wallingford, Pennsylvania, being duly sworn according to law, deposes and says, from 1919 until 1933, I was a Social Democrat and a member of the German Reichstag. Prior to March 11, 1933, I was the editor-in-chief of a chain of daily newspapers with my office in Cologne, Germany, which led the fight against the Nazi Party. On March 9, 1933, members of the SS and SA came to my home in Cologne and destroyed the furniture and my personal records. At that time, I was taken to the Brown House in Cologne, where I was tortured, being beaten and kicked for several hours. I was then taken to the regular government prison in Cologne, where I was treated by 2 medical doctors and released the next day. On March 11, 1933, I left Germany, signed and sworn to, and unquote. Prior to the organization of the Gestapo on a national scale, local SA meeting places were designated as arrest points, and the SA members were employed in the taking into custody of communists and other persons who were actually or supposedly hostile to the Nazi Party. This activity is described in document 1759 PS, U.S. Exhibit 420, which is an original affidavit made by Raymond H. Geist, G-E-I-S-T, document 1759. Mr. Geist was former United States consul in Berlin. He's now in Mexico City. And I should like to quote from a portion of his affidavit, the first being on page 5 of the English translation, about the middle of the page. Starting quoting, at the beginning of the Hitler regime, the only organization which had meeting places throughout the country was the SA, stormtroopers. Until the Gestapo could be organized on a national scale, the thousands of local SA meeting places became the arrest points. There were at least 50 of these in Berlin. Communists, Jews, and other known enemies of the Nazi Party were taken to these points. And if they were enemies of sufficient importance, they were immediately transferred to the Gestapo headquarters. During 1933 and 1934, when the Gestapo became universally organized, the SA were gradually eliminated as arresting agents, and the SS were incorporated as administrative and executive officials into the Gestapo. By the end of 1934, the SA had been fairly well eliminated, and the SS, the members of which wore elegant black suits and were therefore called elite guards, became almost identical as functionaries with the Gestapo. Unquote. I now pass to page 7 of this same document. Page 7 of the English translation. It begins in the middle of the
Storey, does that mean that the SA were eliminated for the purpose of arrest or for other purposes too?
No, sir. As I understand, sir, the SA reached its height of popularity in 1934, and immediately after the Rum Purge began to decline. In the meantime, the SS, which originated out of the SA, was growing and became really the strong part and grew and prospered after that. So I think the evidence will show that after 1934, the SA started a rapid decline in its importance. Now on page 7 of the English translation, I should like to quote a part of the consul's report beginning in the middle of the page. Page 7 of the English translation. Another American, Herman I. Roseman, made an affidavit which stated, "Yesterday, March 10, 1933, in the afternoon about 4:30, I came out of KDW with my fiancée, Fräulein Schwarzles, residing in Wilhelmsdorf, giving the address. A man in SA uniform stepped on my toe purposely, obviously offended me and said pardon, and I said bitte and walked ahead. He then followed me and kicked me, saying, 'Naun.' A policeman saw this and walked ahead, paying no attention to attacks made on me. Then I took my passport out of my pocket, showed it to the second policeman, and said that I was an American citizen. But he walked ahead, obviously not able to afford me protection, or at least being unwilling. The SA man continued to attack me, struck me in the face, wounded me over the eye, and continued to do me bodily harm. During this attack, all the time my walking along, we reached another policeman, and I applied to him, showing my passport, and said, 'I am an American and am entitled to protection.' He shrugged his shoulder and said, 'What can I do?' By this time, the SA man had obviously inflicted enough attack upon me and walked away. Upon my appeal, the policeman brought my fiancée and me to the station house at 13 Bayreuther Strasse. My fiancée and I reported to the officer in charge. He heard the story and said he was sorry, but there was nothing to do. My face was bleeding. The policeman said that he had orders not to interfere in any affair in which the SA man took part. I then asked him what I could do to protect myself. He said there was nothing to do but to wait until the situation was better. He added that the police were absolutely powerless and were under the direction of the SA, and that there were SA Sturmabteilung in the police itself. Thereupon I departed." Now on the next page, on page 8, was another American, Mrs. Jean Klauber, and I quote from her affidavit. "On the night of Friday, March 10, 1933, she and her husband had retired for the night when they were awakened by a prolonged ringing of their apartment bell. They heard pounding upon the street door and a demand for immediate entry, and a concurrent threat to break the door down. The street door was opened by the janitor's wife, and a party of 4 or 5 men entered and went at once to the apartment of the deponent, where they again rang and pounded on the door. Mr. Klauber asked who was there, and was answered, 'The police.' He opened the door, and a party of 4 or 5 men in brown uniforms One wearing a dark overcoat and carrying a rifle pushed in, jostling Mr. and Mrs. Klober aside. One asked Mrs. Klober where the telephone was, and she indicated the room where it was to be found and started to go there. Thereupon she was knocked down by one of them. They went on to the bedroom where Mr. and Mrs. Klober followed them, and they demanded their passport. Mr. Klober went to the wardrobe to get his and was stopped, being asked by the intruders whether he was carrying any weapons. Being clothed only in pajamas, his denial was accompanied by a gesture indicating his garb. He then turned to the wardrobe, opened it, and reached for one of his 4 suits hanging there in what he thought the passport was, and was immediately attacked from behind by all but one of the intruders, who beat him severely with police clubs, the one with the overcoat and rifle standing by. Remarks were shouted such as, "Look, 4 suits, while for 14 years we have been starving." Mrs. Klober tried to inquire the reason for their actions and was answered, "Jews, we hate you. For 14 years we have been waiting for this, and tonight we'll hang many of you." When the intruders stopped beating Mr. Klober, he was unconscious, and they handed the passports, and they again demanded the passports of Mrs. Klober. Mrs. Klober found her American passport and her German passport, required by local authorities as the wife of a German citizen and issued by the police at Munich after her arrival here. And the intruders took both in spite of Mrs. Klober's protest that she was an American. She then searched for her husband's passport, laid hold of his pocketbook, and in her excitement offered it to them. Though full of money, they refused it and demanded the passport. Mrs. Klober then found it and handed it over. Then the intruders returned to the unconscious Mr. Klober, saying, "He hasn't had enough yet," and beat him further. Then they left, saying, "We are not yet finished." And just as they departed, one of them said to Mrs. Klober, "Why did you marry a Jew? I hate them," and struck her on the jaw with his police club. That's the end of the affidavit. Now, continuing, the next paragraph is the statement of the U.S. consul. I personally can verify that the police had been instructed not to interfere, and this is that there was an official sanction for these activities. Affidavits taken from numerous victims attest this fact. I had become acquainted with the 2 police officers stated at the corner of Bellevue Strasse and Tiergarten Strasse, near where the Consulate General was located. These officers told me that they and all the other police officers had received definite instructions not to interfere with the SA, the SS, or the Hitler Youth, unquote. In addition, SA members served as guards at concentration camps during this consolidating period and participated in persecution and mistreatment of persons imprisoned therein. I now refer to document 2824 PS, which is a book entitled Concentration Camp at Nuremberg. It's U.S. Exhibit 423. This was by an SA Sturmbannführer named Schaefer, who was the commander of the concentration camp at Nuremberg. And I quote the excerpt on the first page of the English translation, reading, "The most trusted, oldest SA men were selected in order to give them homes in the camp since they were the permanent camp guards. In such a manner, we created a cadre of experienced guardsmen who were constantly prepared to be employed." Unquote. Further evidence concerning the operation of the concentration camps by the SA is found in document 787 PS, U.S. Exhibit 421. This is a report to Hitler from the public prosecutor of Dresden concerning the nollipross of one Vogel, who was accused of mistreatment of the persons imprisoned in the concentration camp. And I quote from that report beginning at the first, document 787.
Yes, go on.
The prosecuting authority in Dresden has indicted Oberregierungsrat Erich Vogel in Dresden on account of bodily injury while in office. The following subject matter is the basis of the process. Vogel belongs to the Gestapo office of the province of Saxony since its foundation, and is chief of Main Section 2, which formerly bore the title ZUB. In the process of combating efforts inimical to the state, Vogel carried out several so-called borderland actions in the year 1933, in which a large number of politically unreliable persons and persons who had become political prisoners in the border territories were taken into protective custody and brought to the Hohenstein protective custody camp. In the camp, serious mistreatment of the prisoners had been going on at least since the summer of 1933. The prisoners were not only, as in protective custody camp Bredau near Stettin, beaten into a state of unconsciousness for no reason with whips and other tools, but were also tortured in other ways, as for instance with a drip apparatus especially constructed for the purpose, under which the prisoners had to stand so long that they came away with serious purulent wounds on the scalp. The guilty SA leaders and the SA men were sentenced to punishment of 6 years to 9 months of imprisonment by the main criminal court of the Provincial Court in Dresden of 15 May 1935. Vogel, whose duties frequently brought him to the camp, took part in this mistreatment. Insofar as it happened in the reception room of the camp during the completion of the reception formalities, and in the supply room during issuing of the blankets, in this respect it should be pointed out that Vogel was generally known to the personnel of the camp exactly because of his function as head of the ZUB, and his conduct became at least partly a standard for the above-named conduct of the SA leaders and men. I want to read the remainder of that quotation. I'm sorry, I don't have it here. There's a little portion there that should be read immediately following my statement, and then I start it. Well, I don't have it right now. I'll skip to the quotation just below there. Vogel stayed in the reception room a long time and watched these proceedings without doing anything about them. In his presence, for instance, the SA men Mutzi dealt such blows to one man without provocation that he turned around on himself, as already stated. Vogel not only took no steps against this treatment of the prisoners, but he even made jokes about it and stated that it amused him the way things were popping up here. In the supply room, Vogel himself took a hand in the beating amid the general severe mistreatment. The SA men there employed whips and other articles and beat the prisoners in such a manner that serious injuries were produced. The prisoners partly became unconscious and had to lie in the dispensary a long time. Vogel was often present in the supply room during the mistreatment. At least in the following cases, he personally laid violent hands upon prisoners. And then skipping down, the prisoner was laid across the counter in the usual manner, held fast by heads and arms, and then beaten for a considerable time by the SA men with whips and other articles. Along with this, Vogel himself took part in the beating for a time, and after this mistreatment slapped him again, so that the prisoner appeared green and blue in the face. The prisoner is the tinsmith Hans Kuhitz, who bore the nickname Johnny. Upon his departure, Vogel gave the head of the supply room, Tuppenheiner Myra, from 5 to 6 Reichsmarks with the stated reason that the SA men had sweated so. The money was then distributed by Meyer to the SA comrades who had taken part in the mistreatment. Unquote. Another activity of the SA during the days just following the Nazi seizure of power was to act as auxiliary police. This is shown in document 3252, PS, U.S. Exhibit 424. This publication is a book written by Hermann Goering.
Colonel Storey.
Yes, sir.
Is that a document which shows on its face that the man was punished for this conduct?
I think it does, yes, sir. I think it does.
Well, I think the fact ought to be stated.
I believe it was stated, sir. You see, in the beginning, it says that the prosecuting authority in Dresden had indicted Vogel on the count of bodily injury, and I thought it stated that he had been punished. Sorry.
Right, the document does appear to state it, but I think you ought to state it in court.
Do you have that quoted?
The document ends up with
it
paragraph
does
3.
state that he was punished, yes, sir. The purpose of introducing it was to show what actually took place. I now turn to document 3252, PS. As I just mentioned, its book is entitled Hermann Goering, The Man and His Work, unquote, by Erich Gritzbach, in which it is declared that the ranks of the security police were strengthened by the SA, and which was characterized as the most reliable instrument of the movement. And I should like to quote on the first page of document 3252, English translation. Quote, it's the fourth paragraph. The present reorganization of the security police is hardly noticed by the public. Their ranks are strengthened by the SA, the most reliable instrument of the movement. The auxiliary police has given effective aid by their fighting spirit in the struggle against the communists and other enemies of the state, not only to Goering, but has, driven by their National Socialist desire for a new spirit within the executive police, assisted in their rigid organization, unquote. I next skip to the SA participation in the Jewish program of the 10-11 November 1938, shown by document 1721 PS, U.S. Exhibit 425. This is a confidential report of the SA Brigade Führer to his group commander, dated 29 November 1938. And on the English translation, starting at the beginning, without reading the addresses, it's to SA Group Electoral Palatine Kurpfalz, Mannheim. The following order reached me at 3 o'clock on 10 November 1938. On the order of the Gruppenführer, all the Jewish synagogues within the 50th Brigade are to be blown up or set on fire immediately. Neighboring houses occupied by Aryans are not to be damaged. The action is to be carried out in civilian clothes. Rioting and plundering are to be prevented. Report of execution of orders to reach the Brigade Führer or office by 8:30. I immediately alerted the Standartenführer and gave them the most exact instructions. The execution of the order began at once. I hereby report that the following were destroyed in the area of, and then there follows a list of 35 synagogues that were destroyed, and I just refer to a few of them. Number 1, synagogue at Darmstadt, destroyed by fire. Number 4, at Gruffenhausen, interior and furnishings wrecked. Then under Standard 145, synagogue at Bensheim, destroyed by fire. And the next 4 items are synagogues destroyed by fire. In Standard 168, 8 synagogues are shown to have been destroyed by fire. Standard 186, the first synagogue in Berfelden, blown up. And then follows several others where the furnishings were wrecked. Standard 221, the first synagogue and chapel in Gross Serow, destroyed by fire. The next one torn down and the furnishings destroyed. And then sign the Führer Brigade 50, and by the signature, which is illegible, Brigade Führer. In connection with the unquote, in connection with the persecution of the Jews, we again find the SA performing its function of propaganda for the Nazis. In this connection, it was the function of the SA to create and foster among the Jewish people an anti-Jewish spirit and sentiment without which the terrifying crimes against humanity perpetrated against the Jewish race certainly could not have been tolerated by any civilized people. Substantial and convincing evidence of this function is to be found in the bound volumes of the SA Man. Throughout the period covered by these volumes, there appeared in the publication article after article consisting of the most cruel and vicious sort of anti-religious propaganda designed to engender and foster hatred and hostility toward the Jewish race. I'll simply refer to a few of the titles appearing. One on 27 July 1935 at page 4. The title is Finish Up with the Jew, unquote. They're shown, if Your Honor please, document 3050, pages 16 to 18. They're listed. Document 3050.
Yeah.
issue of 2nd February 1935, page 5, The Jewish World Danger. 20th July 1935, page 4, Jewish Worries. 1 June 1935, page 1, Jews aren't wanted here. And then follows a statement, I quote, "Then also outside of the last German village, the sign will stand, Jews are not wanted here. And then finally, no German citizen will again cross the threshold of a Jewish store." To achieve this goal is the mission of the SA man as political soldier of the Fuhrer. Next to his word and his explanations stand his example. And then another of 17 August 1935, page 1, God Save the Jew. And then another of 5 October 1935, page 6, entitled The Face of the Jew, with a portrait of the Jew holding the hammer and sickle. I'll just refer to one or two more of them. Here is one on 23rd November 1935, page 2. The title, The Camouflaged Benjamin, Jewish Cultural Bolshevism in German Music. Then here's one of 2nd January 1937, page 6. A hideous-looking picture. The title is Romania to the Jews. And I give the final quotation at the last one, 3rd of February 1939, page 14. The title being Friends of World Jewry, Roosevelt and Ickes, unquote. The impressive thing about all these articles is the fact that it was not intended that the philosophies expressed in them should be confined to members of the SA. On the contrary, the plan was to educate the members of the SA with this iniquitous philosophy, and for the SA in turn to be employed for its dissemination into the minds of the German people. This fact is demonstrated in the introduction to a series of anti-Jewish articles in the paper of 5 December 1936 at page 6. Your Honor, please, I'll just read the title. It's found on page 28 of this same document. The title is Grave Diggers of World Culture, unquote, on page 28. And also on that same page of 28, I quote this statement. We suggest that the comrades especially take notice of this series of articles and see that they are further circulated, unquote. In addition, intensive campaigns were conducted to persuade the public to purchase and read the SA Man, and the various issues were posted in public places so that the general public might read them. The SA Man itself contains several photographs which show particular issues posted upon street bulletin boards. There were several photographs showing the advertising displays, one of which, for example, the title reads, and that is in the issue of 31 October 1936, and it reads, quote, "The SA Man belongs in every house, every hotel, every inn, every waiting room, and every store," unquote. Also in an issue of 24 August 1935, at page 3, there was a group picture of an SA man, of SA men on trucks, and in front of the trucks were large signs, one of which read, quoting, "Read the Sturmer and you will know the Jew," unquote. On the same page of the publication I mentioned, there's a photograph of what appears to be a public rally at which there is displayed a large poster reading, quote, "He who knows the
Colonel
Jew..."
Storey,
No,
the tribunal expressed its view yesterday that they didn't desire to hear cumulative evidence. Isn't this rather cumulative?
I agree with you, Your Honor, that possibly it is. Trying to draw the line on it. I'll omit the rest of them. Now we'll pass to the final phase of the function of the essay and the conspiracy. Its participation in the program...
If you're passing, perhaps we better adjourn now for 10 minutes.
Yes, sir. Your Honors, please, I just started into the final phase or function of the essay and the conspiracy, that of its participation in the program for preparation for warfare. In this connection, Your Honors asked this morning a question about the arresting and police activities of the SA, and I mentioned that they had declined after 1934. For fear there was some misapprehension, I would like to state that as a police organization and as an arresting agency, they declined steadily after 1934. And then we go in now to the phase where they went into military preparation, the next phase, and that's the phase with which I deal now. Your Honor, please, I have here an official governmental publication issued by the British government in 1943, the title being The Nazi Party and Organizations, and I should like to quote as to the organization and membership of the SA from that publication. It's the most authoritative that I've been able to find, and I would like to quote briefly from it. The SA were founded in 1921 as a paramilitary organization to protect Nazi meetings and leaders and to throw out interrupters and hecklers.
Did you say 1941?
1943, Your Honor.
No, but you read from it. You read from the document, and you said that they became a paramilitary organization in
1921.
21.
1921, I beg your pardon. This is just a brief description of when they were organized and their membership.
Yes.
To fight political enemies and to provide pre-military training at a time when the legal Reichswehr was limited to 100,000 men. Their highest leader is Hitler himself, his deputy, and he is called the Stabschef, Chief of Staff der SA, from 1930 till 1934 in June, was Rome, and from then onwards to his death in May 1943 was Victor Lutze, and since August 1943 was Wilhelm Schepman. In January 1933, the SA had 300,000 members, January 1933. After the seizure of power, its strength increased quickly. At present, it has a membership of from 1.5 to 2 million. Now, the date of this is in 1943. We again find the SA employed to inculcate a particular Nazi ideology into the minds of the people of Germany. At this point, it was the function of the SA to prepare Germany mentally for the waging of a vicious and aggressive war. At all times, and especially during the period from 1933 to 1939, SA leaders emphasized to SA members the duty and responsibility of creating and fostering a militaristic spirit throughout Germany. In 1933, Hitler established the so-called SA sports program. And at that time, according to Sturmfuhrer Baer, in his pamphlet, which I previously introduced in evidence as 2168, says, on page 6 of the English translation, it's just one sentence, I quote, "Commission to obtain an increase of and preservation of a warlike power and a warlike spirit as the expression of an aggressive attitude," unquote. In 1937, Hitler renewed the so-called sports program, and as recited in document 3050, which is the English translation of these newspaper articles, on page 12, he had a statement, quoting, "for the fostering of a military spirit," unquote. The organization book of the party is to the same effect. Document 3220, P.S., U.S. Exhibit 323. And I quote from a portion of that book, which paragraphs 1 to 3 on page 1 of the English translation. 3220. Beginning at the first paragraph. While the political organization of the NSDAP has carried out the political leadership, the SA is the training and education instrument of the party for the realization of the world philosophical, soldier-like attitude. In conformity with the directives of the Führer at the time of the Reich Party of Freedom, the SA is as the voluntary political soldiery, the guarantor of the National Socialist movement, of the National Socialist Revolution, and of the resurgence of the German people. Consequently, the young German in the SA is being inculcated in the first instance from the standpoint of world philosophy and character, and trained as the bearer of the National Socialists and will. Equally significant is a suitable education and training which the SA has accomplished within the yearly classes and which have satisfied their arms obligation. This prevails unto the age they and all their spiritual, mental, and physical powers are ready for use in maintaining the movement, the people, and the state. They should find their best home in the SA. All that which could divide them economically, culturally, professionally, or because of origin is being overcome in the SA by the spirit of comradeship and manly dignity. In that manner, the SA is building a decisive factor on the path to a popular community. Its spirit should radiate with soldierly tradition and possibility of application on all existing units outside of the movement. Their guardianship is thus an important mission of the SA, unquote. A number of articles which were obviously designed to serve as war propaganda material have been translated. In other cases, only the titles, and the titles themselves being so comprehensive that they disclose the nature and substance of the articles. I should like to refer to a few of these titles on this subject. They're shown on the English translation of 3050, and they're listed on page 1. On the question of the Nazi Lebensraum philosophy, the issue of January 5th, 1935, page 13. The article, The German Living Space. The issue of 10 October, 1936, page 15. Our Right and Our Colonies. Another of 14 October 1938, page 3. The title, Space and Vote. Colonies for Germany, 2nd January 1937, page 4. And I should like to quote briefly from that article. Is that on page 1? I believe it's on page 1 of the English translation, 3050. The German ambassador in London, Herr von Ribbentrop, recently, on occasion of a reception in the Anglo-American Fellowship, has renewed in his speech, which aroused great interest, the unretractable claim of Germany for the restitution of its colonies which had been snatched away. Shortly thereafter, the Reichsbank President and Reich Minister of Economics, Dr. Schock, published in the English magazine Foreign Affairs a detailed article on the German. That's on page 2, I believe, of the English translation, Your Honor. Dr. Schock published in the English magazine Foreign Affairs a detailed article on the German colonial problem. For the rest, Dr. Schock laid out the categorical demand that Germany must, in order to solve its raw materials problem, get colonies which must be administered by Germany, and in which the German standard currency must be in circulation. Now, the next group of articles dealing with the Versailles Treaty, and I only quote from a few of them on page 3 of that same translation. Here is one of 7 April 1934, page 13. Quote, "What is the situation regarding our battle for equal rights?" Unquote. 30th of June 1934, page 15. The title, "The Dictate of Versailles." This article reads in part, quoting, "The Dictate of Versailles established the political, economical, and financial destruction of Germany in 440 artfully, one could also say devilishly devised paragraphs. This work of ignominy is a sample of endless and partly contradictory repetitions in constantly new forms. Not too many have occupied themselves with this thick book to a great extent, for one could only do it with abomination." Another title, 7 July 1934, page 15. "The Unbearable Limitations of Our Fleet." Another one, 19 January 1935, page 13. "Versailles, after 15 years." This article reads in part, "This terrible word Versailles, since a blind nation ratified it, has become a word of profanity for all those who are infatuated in the spirit of this enormous production of hatred. The Versailles Dictate is German fate in the fullest sense of the word. Every German stood up under the operation of this fate during the past 15 years. Therefore, every last German must also grasp the contents of this dictate, so that one single desire of its absolute destruction fills the whole German vote." Unquote. I'll omit the other quotation. The other one, the last one I'll refer to is 13th of February 1937, quoting, "Versailles will be liquidated." And that's on page 4, Your Honor, please. The last paragraph on page 4 of the English translation. "The National Socialist movement has again achieved a victory, for upon its flag since the beginning of the fight stands the liquidation of the Versailles Treaty. For this fight, the SA marched year after year." Unquote. A third group of articles describing preparations for war, purportedly being carried on by other nations, are found on page 5 of that same document. and I refer to just a few of them. The issue of January 26, 1935, page 14, quoting, "Military training of the English youth," and showing pictures of Eton students wearing their traditional Eton dress, tall hats and frock coats, and marching with rifles. Another one, quote, "The Army of the Soviet Union," of date 16 March 1935, page 14. Another one, the 4th of April 1936, page 13. "The Red Danger in the East." Another one, the 29th of August 1936, page 10. "Russia prepares for World War." Another one, 19th of June 1937, page 7. "Red Terrorism Nailed Down." I shall pass the rest of them. Now the next is the SA's participation in the aggressive war phase. This is the final phase of the SA participation in the conspiracy. The preparation by SA of the youth of Germany for participation in aggressive warfare. I hardly think I need emphasize that one of the most important steps in carrying out of the conspiracy was the training of the youth of Germany in the technique of war and their preparation physically and spiritually for the waging of aggressive war. The SA was delegated this most important responsibility. I have here document 3215 PS, USA Exhibit 426, which I offer in evidence, and it's an excerpt from Das Archiv and contains Hitler's characterization of the task of the SA in this respect. It's on page 1 of the English translation of 3215. Start the reading where it says, "Already in 1920. Already in 1920, by the founding of the National Socialist Sport Troop for NSA, the Fuhrer established the extensive mission of this SA of that time, in which he declared in the protocol of its founding, quote, 'The Sport Troop SA shall be the bearer of the military thought of a free people. In the same sense, the Fuhrer said in his book, Mein Kampf, give the German nation 6 million perfectly trained bodies in sport, all fanatically inspired with the love of the fatherland and trained to the highest offensive spirit, and a National Socialist state will, if necessary, have created an army out of them in less than 2 years, unquote. The military character of SA is demonstrated by its organizational composition. I refer to the chart on the wall, which is our document 2168, and it's taken from this book, being the pamphlet of the SA Sturmführer, and the chart is taken from the official book. I simply refer to the chart and call attention of Your Honor that it was organized into units closely corresponding to those of the German army. As the tribunal will see, the organizational scheme consisted of divisions. Down at the bottom in that pyramidal structure, at the top, the division, next the brigade, the regiment, the battalion, the company, the platoon, and the squad. In addition, there were special units and branches, including cavalry. Over to the right, Your Honors will notice, including cavalry, signal corps, engineer corps, and medical corps. There were also, as Baer pointed out in his pamphlet, 3 officer training schools. Similarly, SA members wore distinctive uniforms adapted to military functions, bore arms, and engaged in training, forced marches, and other military exercises. SA members, moreover, were governed by general service regulations which closely resemble service regulations of an armed force. They are contained in document 2820 PS, U.S. Exhibit 427, which I offer in evidence. Your Honor, they have found at page 3 of the translation of document 2820. I'll simply refer to a few of them. These regulations provide for punishment, designating them as penal regulations for disobedience of orders and infractions of regulations. The punishments which are provided demonstrate the militaristic character of the SA, and I'll mention a few of them. Reprimand in private, reprimand in presence of superiors, an announcement thereof at formations, prohibition of the right to wear service uniform, house arrest, so forth. Preparation for war through the SA training program was commenced in Germany as early as 1933. But the scope of this program was not made public because of the fact that it actually constituted a violation of the Treaty of Versailles. The strict secrecy with which the program was surrounded is shown in document D44, U.S. Exhibit 428, which I offer in evidence. And on page 1 of the English translation, quoting, this is from the Supreme Command of the SA Chief of Staff, and it has to do with publications on the SA. Further to my instruction, Z2 1351-33, dated 11 July 33, I find cause to ask all SA authorities to exercise the greatest caution with regard to any publicity given to the SA service, not only in the press, but also in the information and news sheets of the individual SA units. Only during the last few days, the Reich Ministry of the Interior, at the request of the Foreign Office, has given strict instructions to all Reich authorities, according to which the most severe control is to be exercised on all publications which might give other countries an opening to construe German infringements of the terms of the Versailles Treaty. As is known from the Geneva negotiations, our opponents have piled up material collected in Germany and submitted to them, which they use against us on every occasion during the conferences. From this point of view, the information sheets circulating among the subordinate SA units cause the liveliest concern. I hold all higher SA leaders responsible that any such internal information sheets appearing in the district of their command are submitted to the most stringent control before they go into print. And I feel compelled to draw attention to the threat of a prosecution for treason pronounced by official instructions issued in the last few days in cases where such reports, printed no doubt in good faith, are publicized and therefore exposed to the danger of falling into the wrong hands. On principle, pictures of the technical, specialized units of the SA and SS, in particular of the signals, motorized, and possibly also the air wings, which now exist outside these formations, are forbidden, such pictures enabling other countries to prove the alleged formation of technical troop units, unquote. Similarly, secrecy was provided for in the order assigning a Wehrmacht officer to the SA in January 1934 to assist in the SA training program. This document, 2823 PS, U.S. Exhibit 429, which is a copy of a memorandum of SA headquarters dated 20 January 1934, and it designates an officer of the Wehrmacht to assist in the military training of SA members, and goes on to provide, and I quote from paragraph 7 of the English translation of 2823, quoting, "For the purpose of camouflage, Lieutenant Colonel Oleb will wear SA uniform with the insignia of rank according to more detailed regulation of the Supreme SA Leader," unquote. The military training program of the SA was for many years conducted under the guise of the sports program. This plan was created by Hitler as early as 1920 by founding of what he called the sport program. The fact that the so-called sports program was in reality closely associated with, and in fact a means of providing military training for the German youth, is shown by the following characterization of the program by Lutze, the Chief of Staff of the SA, in an article written in 1939. I now refer to document 3215, USA Exhibit 426, and I quote excerpts of the English translation on page 2, 3215. Quoting, "This goal setting also served for the decrees of the Führer to the SA of 1935 regarding the renewing of, in 1936, regarding the evaluation of, in 1937, regarding the yearly repetitive exercises of the SA Sports Badge. Parallel to this decree of the Führer for the physical betterment and military training, the organizational and development missions within the SA were met. Out of the conception that the preservation and intensification of the military power of our people must especially be requested by military and physical exercises, the training was especially carried out systematically in these fields. In 25 schools of the troop and in 3 Reichsführer schools, in 25 schools of the troop and 3 Reichsführer schools of the SA, yearly 22,000 to 25,000 officers and non-coms were trained since 1934 in special educational courses until they possessed the education and examination certificates. In clearly outlined training directives, the training goals which had to be achieved yearly were given, and at the same time the yearly Reich competitive contests were established. Hand in hand, the training of the Führer Corps and the corresponding organizational measures and the training at the front proceeded on the broadest basis," unquote. In connection with the military training of the sports program, I refer to document 2354, U.S. Exhibit 430, which demonstrates the tests and standards required for obtaining the sports award. Document 2354. What page? Page 2 of the English translation. I'm not going to read all of it, if Your Honor please, but just refer to a few of them. Group 2, military sports. 25-kilometer march with pack. Firing of small caliber arms. Aim throwing of hand grenades. 200-meter cross-country race with gas mask over 4 obstacles. Swimming or bicycle riding. Basic knowledge of first aid in the case of accidents. I'll pass the others. In 1939, the SA sports program was formally recognized in a decree issued by Hitler as a military training program, and the SA was openly declared to be an agency for pre- and post-military training. That is, for military training prior to or following service in the Wehrmacht. I have document 2383, PS, U.S. Exhibit.
Colonel Storey,
Yes.
you've just drawn our attention to a document, 3215 PS, which shows that from 1934 onwards, 25,000 officers and non-commissioned officers were trained by the SA.
Yes.
Isn't that sufficient to
Yes.
show that the military nature of the organization?
I think so. This was just the decree of Hitler. May I just refer to it by reference for the record? Well, I'll not read the decree, and
Go on. What are you referring to?
Document 2383, page 11 of the English translation, contains a copy of the decree legalizing the training program for pre- and post-military training. It would have been one thing for the SA to conduct a military training program for its members, but the SA program was not confined to its members. The entire youth of Germany was enlisted into a feverish program of military training. I refer to a quotation in document 2354 from the same organization book, which is at page 2 of the English translation, in which the Chief of Staff, Lutze, said, and I quote briefly, "In order to give conscious expression to the fostering of a valiant spirit in all parts of the German people, I further decide that this SA sports insignia can also be earned and worn by persons who are not members of the movement, insofar as they comply racially and ideologically with the National Socialist requirement." Document 2168 PS shows that responsibility for conducting this nationwide program was lodged in the operational main office of the SA. Page 8 of the English translation I quote, "Prepare the fighting training of the bodies of all Germans capable of bearing arms, and as preparation therefore must organize the execution of corporeal exercises and sports movements, so that the widest stratum of the population is laid hold upon and will be kept in condition to bear arms, both physically and spiritually, as well as ideologically in character up to the greatest old age. I pass from that phase now. Document 3215, which is an excerpt from Das Archiv, and I refer to page 2 to 3 of the English translation, beginning at the bottom of page 2. I quote, "Next to the companies of the SA were the sport badge associations in which all the militaristic nationals entered who were prepared to voluntarily answer the call of the SA for the preservation of military proficiency. Up until now, around 800,000 nationals outside of the SA could successfully undergo the physical betterment as well as the political military training of the SA on the basis of the SA badge. As pronounced heretofore, it may be shown," well, I'll not read that portion because, unquote. The military program of the SA was no mere marching and drilling society. It embraced every phase of the technique of modern warfare. This is particularly demonstrated by consideration of the articles on military training which appeared publicly throughout the issues of the SA month. I should like to refer to only a few of the titles, and they are set out on pages 8 and 10 of document 3050. Great long list, and I'll only refer to 5 or 6. Here's one of them of 17 February 1934, page 7. Pistol shooting. 21 April 1934, page 13. What every SA man must know about aviation. 19th of May 1934, page 13. Chemical warfare. 2nd of June 1934, page 14. Modern battle methods in the view of the SA man. 4 August 1934, page 13. The significance of tanks and motors in the modern war. And I'll omit the references to the remainder. Similarly, the issues of the SA man contain many photographs and articles demonstrating and portraying the SA participation in military exercise, including forced marching, battle maneuvers, obstacle runs, small caliber firing, and so on. And I simply refer these to Your Honor, and they're shown on pages 11 to 13 of 3050. Just 1 or 2 titles. The 24th of August 1935, page 2. The SA is and remains the shock troop of the Third Reich. Here's one showing the connection with the Wehrmacht. 2nd of September 1938, page 1. The SA and the Wehrmacht, with pictures of SA men on field maneuvers throwing hand grenades. I'll omit the rest of those. Convincing evidence demonstrating the participation of SA in the conspiracy is found in the fact that care was taken at all times to coordinate the military training of the SA with the requirements of the Wehrmacht. This is shown by document 2821, PS. U.S. Exhibit 431, page 1 of the English translation. Quoting, permanent liaison between the Reich Defense Ministry and the Supreme Commander of the SA has been assured, unquote. Another document, 3215, which is an excerpt from Das Archiv, sets forth the cooperation and collaboration with the Wehrmacht and specialized military training. And it was stated in a speech of the Chief of Staff of the SA, document 3215, page 2 of the English translation. U.S. Exhibit 426. In the course of this development, also special missions for military betterment were placed on the SA. The Fuhrer gave the SA the cavalry and motor training and called SA Obergruppenführer Litzmann as Reich Inspector with the mission to secure the cavalry recruits and requirements for the German Wehrmacht through the SA. In close cooperation with parts of the Wehrmacht, special certificates were created for the communication, engineer, and medical units, which, like the cavalry certificate of the SA, are valued as statement of preference for employment in said units. Your Honor, we have 2 or 3 more quotations about cooperation with the SA, the Wehrmacht, but I believe they'd be cumulative, and I'll omit them. I also call attention to the issue, well, this is again with reference to the same thing. I'll pass it. I'll pass through I'll refer only to document 2383, Exhibit 429. Exhibit 429. Number 2383. I'll read a portion of the decree. The Fuhrer, in amplification of my decree of 15 February 1935 and of the 18th of March 1937, regarding the acquisition of the SA sports insignia and the yearly repetitive exercises, I lift the SA sport insignia to SA military insignia. That's 2383, Your Honor, please.
I've got 2383.
Page 11, I beg your pardon.
Page 11. Yes.
Begins with the words de Fuhrer.
Yes.
I'd gotten to the words, I lift the SA sport insignia to the SA military insignia and make it as a basis for pre-imposed military training. I designate the SA as the standard bearer of this training, unquote. The specialized, I skip now to page 48 for the record. The specialized training given SA members in accordance with the requirements of the technical branches of the Wehrmacht is described in document 2168 by SA Sturmführer Bayer. U.S. Exhibit 411, and it's page 13 of the English translation, 2168. page 13. Quoting, "On one side, the young SA man who enters the armed forces, Wehrmacht, from his branch comes prepared with a multitude of prerequisites which facilitate and speed up training in technical respects, while on the other side, those very soldiers, having served, who return out of the armed forces into the SA, keep themselves by constant practice in a trained condition, physically and mentally, and impart their knowledge to their fellows. Thus they contribute a considerable portion to the enhancement of the armed strength and armed spirit of the German people." And then skipping down, the SA each year is able to furnish many thousands of young trained cavalrymen to our Wehrmacht. I'll omit the rest of that. I simply call attention now to an issue of the SA Man dated the 3rd of February 1939 at page 3, which contains a photograph of the Chief of Staff Lutze addressing a group of SA men. And this photograph bears the caption, quote, we will be the bridge between the party and the Wehrmacht," unquote. The second reference shows a photograph of General Brauchitsch and Chief of Staff Lutze reviewing an SA unit. Now I pass to document 3214 PS. Which is U.S. Exhibit 432. It's only one page of it. Quoting, "It was announced that conscripted SA men and Hitler youths can fulfill their military conscription in the SA regiment Feldherrnhalle, whose commander is General Field Marshal SA Obergruppenführer Goering. The regiment for the first time was employed as a regiment of the Luftwaffe in the occupation of the Sudetenland under its Führer and regimental commander SA Gruppenführer Reimann," unquote.
Well, up to now, you have brought evidence to our notice showing that the SA was voluntary. This shows that it was conscripted. When did it become conscripted?
As I understand, Your Honor, if you joined the SA, you got out of conscription, but once you were in it, they could use it as desired. In other words, the SA was a voluntary organization.
That's the evidence you've given up to date?
Yes.
Well, when did it become liable to conscription or used as a
Your Honor, please, I'd like to
substitute for conscription?
May I ask Mr. Burdell to answer that question, who's been working on it? Mr. Burdell.
Your Honor, please, there never was conscription in the SA. As this document shows, document 3214, service in the Feldherrnhalle regiment of the SA took the place of conscription. This first sentence in document 3214, which reads, "It was announced that conscripted SA men and Hitler youths can fulfill their military conscription in the SA regiment Feldherrnhalle," means, as I understand it, that SA men who are conscripted, SA men who are drafted after they have joined the SA may serve their conscription by remaining in the SA or by transferring to the Feldherrnhalle regiment of the SA. The next paragraph of document 3214
designates the requirements that must be fulfilled before the SA man can join this Feldherrnhalle regiment. But if he fulfills those requirements, he may join that regiment, and having done so, that serves the purpose, or it serves the function of conscription in the Wehrmacht. I hope that answers Your Honor's question.
In view of the above, we would expect the SA to have been used as a striking force in the first steps of the aggressive war launched by Germany, and as a basis for so-called commando groups. And such was the case. SA units were among the first of the Nazi military machine to invade Austria in the spring of 1938, as was proudly announced in an article appearing in the SA Man, the 19th of March, 1938, page 10, the article entitled, quote, "We Were There First," unquote. The SA participation in the occupation of the Sudetenland is also shown by document 3036, U.S. Exhibit 102. And that is an affidavit by Gottlieb Berger, a former office holder in the SS who was assigned to the Sudeten German Free Corps. I quote paragraphs 1 and 2 of the affidavit. Paragraph 1. In the fall of 1938, I held the rank and title of Oberfuhrer in the SS. In mid-September, I was assigned as SS liaison officer with Konrad Heinlein's Sudeten German Free Corps at their headquarters in the castle at Dondorf outside of Bayreuth. In this position, I was responsible for all liaison between the Reichsfuhrer SS Himmler and Hinnlein. The honors will recall Hinnlein was the leader in the Sudetenland. And in particular, I was delegated to select from the Sudeten Germans those who appeared to be eligible for membership in the SS or VT, Verfügungstruppe. I, in addition to myself, liaison officers stationed with Hinnlein, included an Obergruppenführer from the NSKK, whose name I have forgotten, and Obergruppenführer Max Jutner from the SA. In addition, Admiral Canaris, who was head of the OKW Abwehr, appeared at Dondorf nearly every 2 days and conferred with Hinnlein. The honors will recall that the Abwehr was the intelligence organization. In the course of my official duties at Hinnlein's headquarters, I became familiar with the composition and activities of the Free Corps. 3 groups were being formed under Hinnlein's direction, one in the Einstein area, Bavaria, and one in the Beirut area, one in the Dresden area, and possibly a 4th in Silesia. These groups were supposedly composed of refugees from the Sudetenland who had crossed the border into Germany, but they actually contained Germans with previous service in the SA and the NSKK, the Nazi Motor Corps, as well. These Germans formed the skeleton of the Free Corps. On paper, the Free Corps had a strength of 40,000 men. Part of the equipment furnished to Hinnlein, mostly haversacks, cooking utensils, and blankets, were supplied by the SA. Unquote. The adaptability of SA to whatever purpose was required of it is demonstrated by its activities subsequent to the outbreak of the war. During the war, the SA continued to carry out its military training program, but it also engaged in other functions. Its wartime activities are set out in documents 3219, which is U.S. Exhibit 403, and document 3216, U.S. Exhibit 434, which are excerpts from Das Archiv. I quote first briefly from 3219. The whole text exclusive of the heading. The General of the SA, Wilhelm Scheppmann, gave further orders to increase the employment of the SA in the homeland war territories because of the requirements of total war employment. This was done in numerous business conferences with Führers of the SA divisions. As a result of these conferences, as well as of measures already carried out earlier for the totalization of the war employment, the SA has placed 86% of its main professional Führer Corps at the disposal at the front, even though the war missions of the SA have increased in the fields of pre-military training. The SA penetration into new territorial parts of the Reich, the air war employment, the State and National Guard, etc. during wartime. The SA as a whole has given at present an even 70% of its nearly million members to the Wehrmacht, unquote. I call attention of Your Honor to the statement of the membership as of August 26, 1944. I quote briefly from 3216, the English translation, just one sentence. By command of the General of the SA Unit General Government was established, the command of which was taken over by Governor General SA Obergruppenführer Lieutenant General Dr. Frank, unquote. I next offer in evidence an affidavit being Exhibit 3232 PS, U.S. Exhibit 435. By Walter Schellenberg. Quoting from the beginning of 1944 on, the SA, I beg your pardon, 3232, English translation.
Yes.
From the beginning of 1944 on, the SA also participated in many of the functions which had previously been entrusted only to the SS, the SEPO, and Army. For instance, the guarding of concentration camps, the guarding of prisoner of war camps, the supervision over forced laborers in Germany and occupied areas. This cooperation of the SA was planned and arranged for by high officials in Berlin as early as the middle of 1943. Unquote. This concludes my presentation of the principal points of evidence concerning the participation of the SA in the conspiracy. But before I conclude, I should like to present to the tribunal a few points which establish the participation in the conspiracy by Defendant Goering in his capacity as an SA member or leader. In 1923, Goering became commander of the entire SA. This is shown in the pamphlet, The SA, which is already in evidence. and the notation concerning Goering's command appears at page 2 of the translation, which I do not intend to quote but simply refer to. Goering's intention to employ the SA as a terroristic force to destroy political opponents is shown by a speech made by him on the 3rd of March 1933 at a Nazi demonstration in Frankfurt. It's document 1856 PS, U.S. Exhibit 437. It's an excerpt from a book entitled Hermann Goering, Speeches and Essays, document 1856. I quote, Goering said, "Certainly I shall use the power of the state and the police to the utmost, my dear communists. So you won't draw any false conclusions by the struggle to the death, in which my fist will grasp your necks. I shall lead with those down there. Those are the brown shirts," unquote. The importance of the SA under Goering in the early stages of the Nazi movement is shown by document 3259 PS, U.S. Exhibit 424. And it's an English translation from the same book, 3259 PS. This is a letter written to Goering by Hitler, and I quote the letter. "My dear Goering, when in November 1923 the party tried for the first time to conquer the power of the state, you as commander of the SA created within an extraordinarily short time that instrument with which I could bear that struggle. Highest necessity had forced us to act, but a wise providence at that time denied that success. After receiving a grave wound, you again entered the ranks, as soon as circumstances permitted, as my most loyal comrade in the battle for power. You contributed essentially to creating the basis for the 30th of January. Therefore, at the end of a year of the National Socialist Revolution, I desire to thank you wholeheartedly, my dear party comrade Goering, for the great values which you have for the National Socialist Revolution and consequently for the German people. In cordial friendship and grateful appreciation, yours, Adolf Hitler." Although Goering did not retain command of the SA, he at all times maintained close affiliation with the organization. This is shown by the photographs of Goering participating in the activities which I have already introduced in evidence. Similarly, in 1937, Goering became the commander of the Feldenhalle Regiment of the SA. The tribunal will recall also my reference to the participation of that regiment in the occupation of the Sudetenland. Now, finally, the evidence considered in the foregoing sections of this brief demonstrates the participation of the SA as an organization in the conspiracy alleged in Count 1. Thus, the SA was first employed by the conspirators to destroy, by force and brutality, all opponents of National Socialism and to gain possession of the streets. Thereafter, upon the seizure of control by the NSDAP, the SA was used to consolidate and to strengthen Nazi power, and to cruelly persecute and destroy all so-called enemies of the state, including the Jewry and the church. And during the period of 34 to 39, the SA was employed for the actual preparation and training of the German people for war, and participated in aggressive war. SA was at all times employed by the conspirators to promote and disseminate the ideology of the Nazi movement throughout Germany, and particularly to perform the function of disseminating anti-Jewish propaganda, and creating and fostering the militaristic and warlike spirit among the peoples of Germany. Thus, at all times during the course of its existence, the functions of the SA corresponded to and were designated to promote the progression of the conspiracy through its various phases. And the conclusion, we think, is irresistible, that the SA was an organization devoted exclusively to the task of assisting the defendants and their co-conspirators in carrying out the objectives in the conspiracy. Thus, in this sense, SA, as well as its members, were in fact co-conspirators and participants in a conspiracy which contemplated and involved crimes against the peace and crimes against humanity and in war crimes. That concludes the presentation of the SA, Your Honor, and the next is the SS by Major Farr.